Welcome to the latest episode of 305 Vox Populi here in the studio at St. Thomas University. And with us today, we have Carlos Lopez Cantera. How you doing, Carlos?
I'm good, Mayor. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So to break the ice, and I think everybody knows you've been on the mountaintop, right? You've seen it all from being a lieutenant governor to being a countywide elected position here in the House leadership and the House of Representatives. But when you first started your career, your first campaign, you started off, you didn't win. You started off with a loss. But I think, and if you could share with us some of those stories, it set you up for the future. It set you up to do everything else you did and reach that mountaintop. So, because I think, look, when you win, everybody's your friend. Everything's good. Everybody wants to call you. But when you lose, that's when you see what you have inside of you, but what everybody else around you has. So talk to us about that night and that determination that you had going forward to reach that mountaintop.
So that's a great question to start off with. The feeling that you have, or that I had, I can't speak for anyone else that's lost an election, but the feeling that I had on that first race, when I had given my all, I mean, I literally every penny I had in the bank, I put it into that race. I spent 10 to 12 hours a day walking door to door. I must have walked and personally knocked on over 10,000 doors. And every precinct that I knocked and worked, I won by 60%, 70%. One of them I won 80%. But there was one part of the district, which is now Palmetto Bay, that I didn't pay a lot of attention to because my analysis of the race was if I win everything north of Bird Road, I'll win. But I didn't take into consideration that there was a question on the ballot in Palmetto Bay to incorporate the city. So this was an August primary, usually not high turnout, but they had like 60% turnout, which I had not anticipated. And that 60% turnout in Palmetto Bay, where I lost, made the difference in the election that I ended up losing by about 500 votes. So that night, having put everything into it, the best feeling, the way that I can describe the feeling is if you ever had that, that breakup with a significant other, that like just you felt like a pain in here, and in your mind you're like, there's got to be a way. I'm gonna get them back. It's gonna be okay. In your mind plays tricks on you. There's something's gonna happen. They're gonna find some ballots, and it's gonna be reversed. But it didn't. I lost that race, and it was very tough, very difficult. And but in the grand scheme of things, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. And it proves that God has a plan for everybody, and you don't understand at the particular moment why something you think is a negative actually is a positive for you. And the biggest positive that came out of that is I lost the election in 2002. Ended up getting elected in 2004, but in that interim, I met my wife, and we met at a club on South Beach. And had I been a state representative, I don't know if I would have been at a club on South Beach the night that I met her. Maybe I would have, but I don't know what trajectory my life would have gone had I won. Would I have been too tired to go out that night because I had just been in Tallahassee for the week? So I met my wife. We ended up getting married, obviously, and we ended up getting married actually 2 weeks before my first session in 2005. So it was the best thing that happened to me. And to your point about the trajectory, if I would have been elected in 2002, that would have been a freshman class from Miami of 5 people. 5 people is a lot of mouths to feed when you're talking about leadership positions. The class I got elected to was only 2 people, myself and Anita Flores. And by the time I was a senior, she had already moved on to the Senate. So I was the only mouth to feed from Miami-Dade County, which made it a lot easier to get a leadership position. And that was the year that the cycle that I was majority leader of the House.
It's a powerful story. So from that night, when you were thinking to yourself, man, the 500 votes, what's going on? And you're right, God always has a plan. To the night in 2004 when you won. How was that feeling in 2004 when you put in all the work? You knocked on 10,000 doors in 2002. You didn't win, but you kept going. You saw that God had a plan. To that night in 2004, how did that feel?
Well, interestingly enough, in my memory, the night of the loss, those memories are more vivid than the ones of the night that I won. I do remember, obviously, every election I won, what happened those evenings. But actually, this past cycle, I spoke to a candidate that I expected to win the day of the election. And I told that candidate, be cognizant of everything you're doing today, because this is going to be your first election win, and you want to remember this. So press record in your brain and take in the moments and commit to remember them, because it's only going to happen once. And I wish someone had told me that. I remember what we did. I remember where we were. I remember some details, but I don't remember crisp details of my first election night like I do the crisp details of the loss. It's like, I don't know why my brain works like that. It registered the memory of the failure more than the success. And failures are nothing but opportunities for success. You learn from failures. If you're not learning from your failures, you're doing something wrong. And if you're not failing, then you're definitely doing something wrong, because nobody's perfect and nobody does it right every time.
You got that right. So from winning in 04 to, and I think it's a great lesson, especially for kids, your journey once you got elected, because a lot of people believe, especially our society today, that everything is microwavable. That you wake up, you turn on the microwave, and poof, here it is. But from winning and understanding the governing process, and especially in Tallahassee, because you had to start off as a freshman. I remember meeting you back then, because I worked for a junior legislator, Representative Arza, at the time. And I remember meeting you and the amount of work that you had to put in, especially those first 2 years as a legislator, which is tough. I mean, you got elected. Everybody thinks when you get elected that no, it's going to be super easy to pass stuff, to get stuff done. So talk to us about that process once you got elected, and learning the legislative process, understanding the art of compromise and working with others to ensure that you're successful for your community.
I was fortunate, because when I got there were still some old timers in the Senate that had been originally elected to the legislature pre-term limits. Term limits didn't come into effect in the Florida legislature until the class of 2000. So some of the people that were in the House for 10, 20, 25 years had then migrated to the Senate, and there was a lot of institutional knowledge over in the Senate, and I was fortunate enough to be connected with some of these icons of the legislature, like Jim King, and I was fortunate enough to get advice from them. One of the best pieces of advice I got from him about not only the legislative process but about life. He in his description, it was about the legislative process, but it works in every part of your life. And I was asking him, there's a particular senator from Tampa that I needed to agree to agenda a bill or to agree to amend a bill. I don't remember what the detail was, but I remember I needed something from this particular senator. So I went to King, who was like one of the most respected senators in the chamber, and I asked him, this guy, I need to get this out of him. What do you suggest? How do I do that? And he said, look, Carlos, the best way to get people to engage with you is to ask them for advice, because people love giving advice. So that was a tool that I used throughout my legislative process when I needed to get something. If I needed you to sponsor an amendment for me, I would come to you and say, Manny, I need your advice. How do I get this piece of legislation, into a bill? Already knowing that you have a bill that is germane, that the subject matter is similar to what I'm seeking, and 9 times out of 10, you'd probably say, oh, I have a bill that does that, and we could put it on mine. And they'll say, that's great, thank you. Wow, that's great. I can't believe this is so fortuitous. But you learn how to do that stuff, and one of the negatives of term limits is how short it is. It was very easy when term limits passed. It was a constitutional amendment that passed many years ago, and the campaign slogan was 8 is enough, which was a very easy slogan, very memorable slogan, because there was a famous TV show back in, I don't remember if it was the 70s or early 80s, called 8 is enough, and it was about a family that had 8 kids. And that slogan worked, and it was an 8-year term limit. But I found that by my 7th and 8th years, when I really became effective and valuable, the most valuable for my constituents. So in retrospect, if I could wave a magic wand and change the term limits, which I do believe are a good thing, I would have made it 12 years. That's probably a more realistic and more efficient and more productive number of years for the constituents. Obviously, if they don't want you there for 12, they'll vote you out. But if they want to have you there, those additional 4 years would have been more productive for those individual constituents from their representatives.
And I hope you all listen to that, because that advice is extremely powerful. A lot of times in life, we think that we're smarter than somebody else or harder working, and it might be true, but there's a tactful way. I think you just learned a tactful way to approach some of these folks in different leadership positions by asking for advice. So that's really, really powerful advice to these college students, and these kids are going to be watching this episode. So from taking that advice and continuing to grow, you decided to run countywide. And you said, you know what, I'm a Republican at the time. Now, everybody, Governor DeSantis won Dade County, but I think this last election, so everybody's like, oh no, Miami-Dade is red now. But when you ran countywide, you're a Republican, a conservative Republican, and you won countywide. And you weren't some of these Republicans that have won countywide that changed, oh no, I'm going to vote for this X, Y, and Z presidential candidate just because it helps my election. No, you stuck to your principles and you won. So talk to us about running throughout the entire county, because now you had to visit, it wasn't just a small district. You had to, and on a Republican primarily, you had to visit Homestead, Miami Beach, Aventura, Miami Gardens, Miami Lakes, Hialeah, everywhere, and you had to talk to people and showcase that you had those leadership skills to be in an executive position that is the property appraiser position here in Dade County. And
beat an incumbent.
And beat an incumbent.
Yes.
You got that right, which is extremely difficult
here
in the 305.
So fortunately, the partisan thing didn't become a big issue in the race. And even if it had, most people know that Republicans are for lower taxes and Democrats are either for status quo or more taxes. And property appraiser, its only mission deals with your property taxes. And I still haven't found anybody that likes to pay more property taxes. Nobody likes to pay more property taxes. I don't think they like to pay what they already pay. So being a Republican, I felt was an asset. You could continue your message of lower taxes. And the property appraiser doesn't affect the actual tax rate that's set by the county commission, but it sets the value. And the higher the value, the higher the taxes. So I ran on a platform of one, it has to be fair. Two, there's black and white in the law. But anytime there's gray or there's a doubt, side on the side of the taxpayer, never on the side of government. And three, there were two more points. Homestead exemption fraud was a big thing. People were very cognizant of it. And people don't like when their neighbors are cheating on their taxes and paying less than what they're supposed to pay. And some people do cheat with their homestead exemption and end up paying less. So I said I was going to crack down on homestead fraud. And then at the time, we were still suffering the effects of the Great Recession as it related to real estate values and mortgages that were underwater. And underwater means that your market value of your property is actually less than what your current principal on your mortgage rate is, what you owe to the bank. And so a lot of homes were getting foreclosed in a lot of neighborhoods, and the incumbent property appraiser would not use the foreclosure sale values to determine your value. So he would still assess you at a higher rate, even though the house next door to you was foreclosed and sold $100,000, $200,000 lower. He would not take that number into consideration. So I made that part of my platform too. And I didn't beat him by a lot. I think out of 210,000 votes cast, I won by 7,000.
Wow.
So it wasn't a slam dunk, but I won. And then I did what I said I was going to do.
No, you definitely did, and you reformed the office. You did such a great job that a year later you received a phone call from Governor Scott, who needed a lieutenant governor. And that's an incredibly powerful position here in Florida and throughout our country. Right now, you go from a spotlight just in Dade County to an opportunity.
Property appraiser is a very small spotlight.
Oh, yeah, you got that right. But it's a countywide elected position.
Yes.
You're in everybody's mailbox when they get their notice, so. But now you get a phone call. So talk to us about that phone call and how hard it was to make that decision, because you just got elected. You were doing a great job. You could have been there for a very long time, but you said, you know what? They're talking about God's plan. There's a higher calling here. So, if you could talk to us about that call and the process in making the decision to accepting being Florida's first Hispanic lieutenant governor, which is huge. You're breaking barriers there as well.
Yes. The funny thing about that call, so I had received a call from the governor's executive secretary asking if I would be available the following day at a certain time for a phone call with Governor Scott. And I said, of course. I had an inkling of what the subject matter was going to be. But the funny thing about that call, and anyone who has a mother, and everybody in this room has a mother, sometimes your mothers call you at the most inopportune time. At least sometimes my mom does. So if I recall correctly, the call was at 3 p.m. on a whatever day. Oh, it was December 17th, 3 p.m. And I scheduled my day so I would be in the car at 3 p.m. with no distractions. And at 3 p.m. my phone rings, and it's my mom. And she's like, honey, and she's talking about some random thing. I was like, mom, wait, mom, I'm expecting a call from the governor. Let me call you back. He's like, oh, okay, I'll call you back, bye. And then it's 3:02, it's 3:03, there's no call. And I'm driving around, and I look at the phone, and it's voicemail, Rick Scott. So I call him back, and I got his voicemail. And then it took like maybe another hour. He called me back, and then we spoke for about 45 minutes. And then he asked me at the end of the call if I'd be interested in considering taking the position, and I obviously said yes. And then from that point until probably close to the holidays, I spent a lot of time on the phone with his general counsel, a really fine gentleman who recently passed away. His name's Pete Antonacci, and he vetted me via phone because of the public records law of the state. I couldn't submit any documentation to them, personal documentation, because it would immediately become a public record. So he did everything by phone. So we spent hours and hours on the phone, him asking me questions about my life, my personal life, my background, my family, my thoughts on policies, and then finally at the day of the Three Kings Parade in 2014, my wife, myself, and Scott and his wife had lunch, and he formally asked me if I would take the position, and then we announced it shortly thereafter.
That's an amazing story. So Carlos, we have a couple questions, and to that point, because I know they had some questions in regards to the position in Tallahassee. So some of the students had lined up various questions for you. So who's going to break the ice?
I actually have a real estate question. I have
to this day, I get more property appraisal questions than anything else. Still.
Yeah. Just because, and I'm going to hit it from the educational standpoint, or the angle, should I say. Do you think we should do a better job of helping students understand what it takes to buy property, the homestead exemption scenario, like all these terms that literally, I probably, these students right now that are teenagers to their young 20s, somewhere between all that, have no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Have no idea what the benefits are to it. What do you think we should do as a society, or as just education as a whole, to help our students understand? And we can even go as big as that's just economic, point blank.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm not mistaken, financial literacy is part of the curriculum now. If it isn't, it should be.
Yeah. It's a conversation.
Look, history, math, science, those are all very important subjects. But financial literacy is equally important, because that gives you the framework for how to live your life. I mean, you have to have a budget in your home. You have a salary, or hopefully you have a salary, you have a job that pays you, and that's a certain amount of money per week or per month or bi-weekly, whatever it is, and you have to make all your expenses fit within that, and then hopefully still have a little left over to have some fun and maybe put some away and save. But if you don't have the basic understanding of just the terminology, you're going to have a mortgage or you're going to pay rent, because those are the costs of where you live. You're probably going to have to pay an electric bill, a cable bill. you're gonna have to pay your cell phone bill. If you have a car, you're gonna make an auto payment or on the loan or on the lease. You have to pay for auto insurance. You got to pay for gas. All these things are guaranteed expenses in your life, and if you don't know how to weigh what comes in versus what's going to go out, you'll end up just building up more debt, and you'll just put it on credit cards, and that is a very dangerous proposition because that just becomes like a monkey on your back it could be forever unless you have a big entrance of dollars to pay off that credit card bill. I had that. I mean, when I graduated college, I had a large credit card balance that I had just been carrying for years because I was living beyond my means. I was living beyond what I was making. And I fortunate enough, I did some real estate stuff in my mid-20s where I was able to pay off that debt, and I've made it a point to not have credit card debt ever since. But those are real important things for people to learn and know about, because it's very easy to get underwater and get in trouble and feel like you're drowning. It's a lot of anxiety, and it's unnecessary if you have the basic skill set to manage those inflows and outflows.
It's more of a follow-up to that, is because we have these students or these young adults that are able to vote at the age of 18, and some of these politicians have such great stances on your property taxes and whatnot, and I firmly believe they have no idea what's being argued at this time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because one, they don't own homes. Two, I don't think it's ever explained to them, even if they don't. What that possibly means. Mm-hmm. I think it's as simply as, what, more money, less money? Okay, but they don't really know how to apply that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Again, you could do that during one school year, like in 12th grade. Just dedicate one subject for the year to financial literacy, and that would be more than enough time to get the basics. So just so they have a cursory understanding of what they can expect in life, because these are things that responsibilities pile on as you get older, and as if you get married and have kids, it's just one thing after another, and then you get surprises. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who live almost paycheck to paycheck now, and one of those surprises, and a perfect example, is your AC breaks in your house and you have to replace it. Well, that's like $3,000 or $4,000 expense that you have to find a way to cover it, because you can't live in Miami without AC. Definitely for half the year it's brutal. So there's people that happens to, and that's a big problem in their life that they weren't expecting. But if you plan for the unexpected, it makes it easier to deal with it.
Any other questions from the class?
Quick question. How exactly did you get into your field of, housing and markets and all that? Like, how exactly, what is it that passion that gave you the passion to do that? Because you could have gone especially in politics and in careers in general, to anything else, but why specifically that one?
So are you asking about why I ran for property appraiser, or why in my private life I do real estate?
Exactly, yeah.
So that was driven by my father. My father is an architect and an engineer, and he had a general contracting company for many years. So he was in the industry, and then he transitioned into real estate development in the mid to early 90s. I graduated from the University of Miami in 1996. So I had a dual major. I had political science and business. So I worked 9 to 5 with him, doing the development stuff. And back then I was doing a lot of the permitting and zoning and approval stuff, which deals a lot with government. And then I was also a political science major and had volunteered on my first campaign in 96. So I had a little bit of shown already an interest in that. And the two things, they actually intersect more than most people think. Real estate and development intersects with government because it requires a lot of approvals, and some of those approvals have to be granted by elected officials. So it just grew from there. The opportunity to make a good income in real estate is a real thing. So that was definitely something that was attractive.
So going to politics now, when you were lieutenant governor with Governor Scott, what's the bill that you think that you guys signed off on that has had the most positive impact on Floridians today?
Wow, there's a lot. The one that I recall working on that I think has made a huge difference in our economy was eliminating sales tax on manufacturing equipment. So we were trying to attract more manufacturing jobs to Florida. We had traditionally been a tourism and construction job state. Those were the big, and agriculture. But we didn't have a lot of manufacturing. So one of the ways that we tried to entice manufacturing companies to move to Florida, because they were already feeling the pain of higher taxes and more regulations in other states, and we knew they were already looking for other states to move their operations to. One of the ways that we sought to entice them was eliminate sales tax, which can be anywhere between 6 and 7.5% on manufacturing equipment. Now, manufacturing equipment can be very expensive. I mean, there's pieces of equipment that could cost $1 million. So not having to pay that sales tax on that is a big deal. And eliminating taxes in Tallahassee is easy, but it's also difficult because you're eliminating a sales tax forever, which means you're eliminating a certain amount of dollars from the budget forever, which are called recurring dollars, which you know is a very, very valuable thing in Tallahassee and budget world. And so if you're asking the legislature to eliminate recurring dollars, you're asking them to eliminate dollars that pay for things that they want it to pay for. So they're not thinking about, oh, well, this is going to attract more jobs. They're thinking, oh, this is going to eliminate a program or some service that benefits my constituents. So it's not as easy as one would think, and it took a lot of negotiating and compromising and convincing, but we were able to achieve it, and that was one of the prouder moments in the legislative process.
Any other questions from the students? And before we start wrapping up, but we talk about your proudest moment. What is one of the most difficult moments as an elected official that you can share with us, right?
As an elected official, they probably all were while I was lieutenant governor. Because when you are a legislator, you're only dealing with state issues when you're in Tallahassee. It's a limited amount of time, and then you go back home, and then you're within your comfort zone. But as lieutenant governor, your district is the whole state, so you have to travel the whole state, and anything that happens in the state is under your purview. So the tragedies that stand out are the Pulse nightclub shooting, the Parkland shooting. I was there on the ground very quickly after they occurred, unfortunately. And then the storms. Irma. I remember Hurricane Irma was a very tough storm for the state. It did damage, but it didn't do as much damage as was expected. But the whole southern part of the state evacuated and went north, and that was a difficult task to achieve. And then Hurricane Michael that hit the Panhandle, Panama City, Fort Walton Beach, that one did a horrible amount of damage. And seeing that stuff and seeing how people's lives were just literally torn apart, that kind of tragedy is stuff that stays with you. And you know, as being in a position like lieutenant governor, there's not a lot you can do at that moment, right? You are trying to put resources where they need to be. But the thing that I did the most was I went around and spent a lot of time just thanking the people who were really doing the day-to-day stuff and putting things back together and consoling people who had lost literally everything and trying to find ways to get them resources to at least start putting things back together. But you know, those unfortunately we had more of those than we would have liked. But that's part of the job. I mean, I'm sure as mayor in Miami Lakes, things happen and you don't want them to happen, but they do, and you have to be there. And sometimes you're just there to console people and put your arms around them and tell them, you know, we're here for you. But at that moment, you can't snap your fingers and make their house reappear and be reconstructed immediately. So it's a tough situation.
You got that right. So part of the show, we turn it around and you get to be the host for a couple questions. So anything you want to throw this way?
What are the specials at your restaurant this week?
Oh man, French toast, man. That's we actually have a buffalo chicken wrap, but our French toast with Nutella is the constant special. That is owning a restaurant. I thought it was gonna be glamorous, show up, shake hands, but no, I had to learn how to cook, and I literally can run the kitchen at any Denny's or IHOP or Waffle House in the country.
Really?
Yeah,
You didn't know how to cook before?
I did not know how to cook. COVID forced me to shift and learn, because that was the only way to ensure that the business would survive. So it was to learn that. But right now I could walk into maybe we do it after this for lunch. I'll walk into the kitchen and whip something up for everybody. I was shaking his head back there. But yeah.
And your wife and kids. You met your wife in the legislative process, didn't you?
I did.
Who was she? Wasn't she an aide to Precourt?
To Precourt.
Precourt.
Yeah, you have a great memory. She was, and I remember I was making Cuban coffee, right? we would always, each office would always make Cuban coffee at a certain time, and that's how we met, and 3 kids later, so 14, 12, and 1 year old. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
One? You have a 1-year-old?
I have a 1-year-old.
And a 14-year-old.
And a 14-year-old.
Wow.
Who turns 15 in a couple months.
Wow, felicidades.
Thank you. But,
And she's not Cuban.
No, from the Midwest.
Yeah.
So,
I remember she wasn't definitely not Cuban.
No,
Her
from Chicago.
Precourt is from Orlando.
She's from Orlando. So yeah, her family moved from Chicago to Orlando, then we met in Tallahassee. So
Has she learned any Spanish?
yes, she's actually pretty good at Spanish. Understands it completely and speaks it a little. So I think going to a restaurant in Hialeah at first, right, was interesting. Going to Chico's, where you walk in and they're like, ¿Cómo está? ¿Qué quiero ordenar?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah, in Hialeah, there's places you go, there's no English.
no English.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an interesting transition. But yeah, 15 years later, and we're still together, extremely happy, and 3 kids. So God is good. Talking about how God has a plan for us all. Who thought that we would have met, similar to how you had met your wife. You didn't win that first election. Look, same there. I never thought I'd be an aide in the legislature. I was up there, and God is good.
I still can't believe you have a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
Wow.
Started.
You look like you're still sleeping though.
Now, but the last maybe 6 months now, it was an interesting process. So.
Yeah, that's something something else that they should teach in that class in high school. That first 6 months to a year of a baby, you don't really get a lot of sleep.
That is very, very true. But it's an incredible process. But
Yes, it is. It's very rewarding, and it only gets better.
100%. Anything else you got? Because if not, in closing, wanted you to share some words of inspiration to future generations, right? And I think you already did a little bit of that today when you talked about asking folks who've done certain things before you for advice. So some words of advice for those kids that are going to be listening in, possibly following your footsteps in public service or in a real estate career. Just in general, the amount of hard work that you've had to put in. So some words of advice.
Well, that's the key word, hard work. And I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and thank the kids for at least pretending like they're interested in what we have to say. But the best piece of advice is it actually has to do with that line that I'm going to steal and use probably in the future about wanting things to be microwavable. Nothing in life is microwavable. Everything takes work. You are not going to become the CEO of a company you work for the second week you're on that job. If you start a business, it is not going to turn into a multi-billion-dollar business overnight. It takes work. Everything takes work, and it takes time. And going back to the elections, some of the toughest days of a campaign are the first days, because you think about election day, and it could be months or a year away, and the task of getting from point A to point B can be quite daunting. But there's an old saying that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So you got to just tell yourself, keep taking steps, keep putting one foot in front of the other, and things will happen. And if you're good at what you do, your talent will be recognized. But the chance of it being recognized the very first day you put it on display is not as likely as maybe after having put it on display for a year. It's more likely that it'll be noticed later rather than sooner. And patience is probably the most important thing that you have to be successful. Be patient and know that your goal is going to happen. Know it's going to happen. Know that you're going to achieve it, and you are just in the gap of time in between when you started it and when you achieved it. And it will happen. Just be patient and know that it's coming, and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Be honest, be ethical, treat others as you'd want to be treated, and good things will come. But don't expect it to come. It is possible it'll come the first day. Miracles do happen, but more likely it's going to take a while for the success to occur, but it will come. You just got to be patient, and it'll come, and just put in grind. Just keep grinding along, and it will happen.
That's amazing. And there you have it, the incredible public service journey of Carlos Lopez Cantera. So tune in next Wednesday on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.